Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Alumni University. We are so happy you all could join us this evening. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes for everyone. This presentation is recorded and will be available on our website in the next couple of weeks. Additionally, if you have any questions throughout Dr. Noble's presentation, please type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get them answered at the conclusion of his presentation tonight. So to introduce our presenter, Calvin Nobles, Ph.D., is chair of the Department of Information Technology and Management, as well as a professor of Information Technology and Management here at Illinois Tech. He has a doctorate in business administration from Temple University, a doctor of philosophy in human factors from Capital Technology University, and a doctor of philosophy in management and engineering from North Central University. His research interests include cybersecurity, information security, and human factors engineering and data security, vulnerability of autonomous vehicles, and smart devices. So we are so happy to have him join us. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Nobles to get started.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me this afternoon. And I realize that I'm probably between you and doing something else more exciting, so I'll go ahead and share my screen and so we can get started. But I am very grateful to be here with you this afternoon. I know it's so important. And so this afternoon, we're going to talk about a subject that's really near and dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about this subject in so many different ways, and you'll see throughout the presentation where I add in a little comedy, but this subject is really important, especially as we just endured a long period due to COVID, and COVID highlighted a lot of things for us. And since we was in COVID and we had our teams decentralized in some aspects, it made them also more vulnerable. And we'll talk about why hacking the human is a very important topic, and we're going to explore it from a human factor perspective during this presentation. Some of the things we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about what is human factors, why humans are targeted. We're going to look and explore why is global cybercrime an issue. And then we're going to talk about human performance issues, cognitive security, cognitive hacks, some mitigation strategies, and just the business value of human factors. I'll start off all my presentations with a famous quote. And this quote is by Kevin Mitnick, and in just essence of time, I read it out loud. Companies spend millions of dollars on firewalls, encryption, and secure access devices, and there's money wasted because none of these measures address the weakest link in the chain, people. And that's from Kevin Mitnick, who was one time a very notorious hacker who broke into many systems. Now he is reformed and he's on our side helping us secure our companies and our governments and our universities. So again, this quote is so important, and I try to add a little comment in there about showing the individual throwing the money out of the window, but in essence, it's part true, and we'll talk about why. And here's something else I like to share, because we talk about what Kevin just said, and here's another caption that those of us in the cybersecurity, the information security, and the information technology field might have seen, is that, we have data security, where we're working hard to secure our data in one corner, and then in this corner, we have everything, the same thing Kevin talked about, and then we have Dave, and Dave is known as the human error. Every day, companies inadvertently create Dave, AKA the human error, not realizing that human error creates a major vector into our networks and into our infrastructure to get access to our data, our intellectual properties, and these things become quite embarrassing from a reputational risk and also from an operational risk for many companies. You think of all the companies that's recently been hacked, and then you think about all the companies that we don't know that's been hacked. And so it becomes very compounding in that sense that we create human error every day without knowing it. And so when we talk about understanding the human factor, we really need to understand there's two definitions. There's a working definition that most people in security and information technology use on a daily basis. We lump everything together when we talk about human factor, from human error, from bad decision making to being non-compliant, people just having bad security practices. We just refer to that as the human factor. That's the working definition that we use. But when we look at the scientific definition, you would notice that the scientific definition is a lot more different than the working definition. And so let's look at that scientific definition. This is a very straightforward definition. It's a scientific approach to improve systems to optimize human behavior and performance when engaging with information systems, technologies, policies, procedures, and automation. In short, it's about taking a very in-depth look at your system and optimizing human performance by looking at the design and improving the design of the systems and removing the high friction areas of your system, whatever your system may be. And that's easier said than done. It's very, very challenging. But there's other domains that have done amazingly well with implementing human factors. We look at aviation, we look at healthcare from a patient care and a patient safety side. We look at nuclear power, nuclear energy, industrial safeties. These domains have done extremely, extremely well in minimizing human error and poor decision-making and just the overall poor designs of systems so humans are able to do what some of the things that they do about, such as inducing risk. And so we have to take that same approach in cybersecurity and learn from the lessons so we can maximize human factor, not the working definition. The working definition is there to stay. It's not going anywhere. But when we talk about human factors as a scientific discipline, that's the goal that we're trying to achieve, to mimic some of the other great achievements by some of the other domains that have done amazingly well with it. People are the Achilles heel of cybersecurity. They're the largest vulnerability in cybersecurity. And humans are one of the most pursued attack vectors. And this is a really sensitive subject because cybersecurity professionals, we don't like when people call humans the weakest link or the largest vulnerability. But I have to take a step back and ask us to look at it differently. When we talk about aviation or aviation accident, we're always looking for what factor or what event led to the accident, what led to the catastrophic accident. A lot of time it could be pilot error, it could be a materialization failure, it could be miscommunication. Regardless of what it is, it's always going to be human induced because it's very difficult to remove the human from many aspects of what we do, including aviation. Aviation design, humans design the airplanes, humans fly the airplane, the pilots monitor the systems when they're on autopilot, pilots land the systems. And so when you think about it in cybersecurity, it's almost impossible to remove the human element from cybersecurity. Even when we're talking about artificial intelligence, because you think about it, who write the algorithms? Who collect the data? Who determines what data's, the data's used in that algorithm? How do we leverage that algorithm for artificial intelligence? Who write the code? And so the point that I'm making here is when you can't really remove the human element, there's a point to where you have to understand that human error is always going to be a part of what you do. Now you have to manage the risk associated with human error and get it to a point to where it's more palatable for the organization and it aligns with the organization's risk strategy and approach. We're not saying that humans can't be a positive influence on cybersecurity. We're not saying that at all. And in fact, a properly trained human with reinforced training and awareness can be extremely effective for an organization. So when we talk about the significance of the human element in this, we have to understand that people are the first and the last line of defense. I have some some colleagues of mine, we argue and we have a difference of opinion. They believe that technology is the last line of defense. I don't necessarily believe that, because the technology doesn't implement itself. The technology doesn't design itself. So again, we're back to that argument where you can't remove the human element from cybersecurity. It's just something that we have to deal with. It's something that we have to learn to make the human element more centered so we can build around it, reinforce it, and solidify some of the gaps, weaknesses, and limitations of the human performance. And so some of the other things we talk about around the human elements is the complex nature of our cyber ecosystems. Our cybersecurity ecosystems are extremely complex, especially at our large corporations. If you ask some of the CIOs, some of the chief information officers, or some of the chief information security officers, or some of the chief technology officers, how complex is your ecosystem? They can't tell you. They can't quantify it for you, and that's not a good thing, because what happens is when your ecosystem becomes too complex, you exceed the cognitive capabilities of your people and your employees. And when people become overwhelmed from a cognitive aspect, they circumvent things. And when people circumvent your processes, your procedures, and your policies, you're exposing the company to more risk. And that's why when it comes to complexity debt, we have to work hard to remove the complexity from these things, simplify them, and build things to the human strengths, which we haven't done so well in cybersecurity. And then the other factor is cognitive attacks are really designed from a sophisticated aspect. I mean, it's almost hard not to fall victim to some of these attacks, because hackers and cybercriminals have all day to come up with a scheme or a scam on how they're going to attack you and be successful in that attack. And so these attacks are very sophisticated. And so this is why another reason why we need more technology that's designed to help influence a positive security behavior from a human, not just technology that we're buying and bolting on to our existing platforms and infrastructure, because that in turn increases the complexity of it. And we know what happens when things are too complex. And again, humans, we're just inseparable from the cybersecurity activity. There's no way right now we haven't found a way to really separate us from our activity, even though we're leveraging automation. We're leveraging some of the greatest technological breakthroughs, but we just haven't found a way to remove the human element to a greater degree. I'm not saying we won't get there in a few years, but at this point, the human is still at the center, and where the human should be at the center, and we have to work to design smarter capabilities. And the other thing is there's a lack of solutions for cognitive attacks. Companies don't think about what are your solutions for your cognitive attacks. And so when we talk about attacking humans, this is really an asymmetric threat to just human nature. We saw this during COVID, where research tells us between 600 to 700% more attacks, 600 to 700% increase in attacks targeting humans, whether it's phishing, whether it's ransomware, or whether it's cognitive attacks. And so the thing we have to ask ourselves is, how do we maneuver this? How do we ask for better solutions? And we're going to get to that later on in the presentation. Because it's still important to know that 80 to 90% of all cybersecurity incidents are the result of human errors. And so this figure, this statistic here, has been sustained for well over a decade. When we talk about breaches and we talk about other forms of cognitive attacks and cyber attacks, these numbers are now sustained. And it's not like we're taking and doing our due diligence to break this down. And there's some weaknesses that we have on why these numbers are sustained and why we struggle to reduce these numbers and prevent human errors from being so progressive in cybersecurity. Statistics tell us that every 39 seconds of a successful cyber attack, I tell you, I think that number is a little low. I think many companies are attacked and they don't report it. In some cases, they just don't know it. And then some companies are very reluctant to come forward because of the reputational damage that it does for a company. And you think about over 230,000 of different types of malware variants created daily. That's a lot for a system or even for a person to try to keep up. Think about the automation trying to keep up. And so if you do that, just multiply that by 7, you can easily see where we are in a run of a week, the different types of variants of malware that's created in a run of a week. And you do that by a month, and then you multiply that by a year, you can see that this number is it's just an ugly number, and it really shows the threat that we're up against when it comes to adversaries and some forms of nation states, or just malicious hackers using malware as a vector. And this leads us to the cost of global cybercrime. Why are we talking about the cost of global cybercrime? Because when we look at what some nation states, and we look at what some hackers are doing, and we look at what some of the other cybercriminals are doing, they have sustained cybercrime as a business. Now, I don't say this to give it any type of credit or some type of, any credibility. I state this to show this is a phenomenon that we're dealing with in our business when it comes to cybersecurity, and that is cybercrime. As you can see, in 2021, the cost of global cybercrime is forecasted to reach $6 trillion. If it was a GDP, it would be second only to the United States and China. And that tells you how rampant and how this is a major problem for companies when we talk about trying to keep their infrastructure, and not only just their infrastructure, but also keep their people safe. And then if you want to break it down by a year, a month, a week, this is some other numbers to look at. And these numbers, I use these numbers to help drive a point. And that point is, with the cost of global cybercrime increasing every year, the vicious cycle of attacks never stop. They're relentless. And a lot of them include us. When I mean us, I mean the human element. Sometimes we are just trying to do our jobs every day, and we make mistakes, we make errors, and we have lapses in judgment. And those things could lead to a catastrophic event such as a cyber attack or a data leak or a data breach. And so at the end of the day, as a human factors engineer, I always say, who needs human factors with numbers like that, right? I just ask that you don't close the door in our face, because we bring some use to the table. And so when we talk about cognitive security, we're talking about how do we secure the human element, particularly the cognitive aspects of how we work. In other words, our psychology. How do we help bring our psychology and at the same time secure our psychology so it's not under attack and it can't be used against us? Because we make mistakes. It's natural. People are going to make mistakes. But in the book, You Can't Stop Stupid, and that's the real title of the book, You Can't Stop Stupid, the authors talk about how you can design systems to prevent people from causing what they call user-initiated losses. User-initiated losses are risk or things that would degrade a company or take down a system if we have better design of our systems. And one of the joys that I'm having this semester is teaching the human-computer interaction course, where we get to talk about when we're designing applications or we designing systems, how do we design systems that are secure, but at the same time have a high level of security and a high level of usability for the end users. And as some people always will say, if you have to trade usability for security, we have to change our mindset, and we have to change the optic on that to say we can have both. We can have a high level of security, and we can have a high level of usability out of the product or the services that's being designed. And then we also have to understand we have limitations. Naturally, we have limitations. And the other thing that's really compelling in this is that, for instance, like an aviation mishap, there's an accident investigation. And so for cybersecurity, we have an investigation, but that investigation primarily is to get the system to a point to where it's back online so those critical services and capabilities can be provided, especially if you're in the business of providing a service to a customer. But what I mean by an error taxonomy is something like the human factors and analysis classification system that's primarily used by the aviation sector. And a good friend of mine in the UK just wrote her thesis on this, and where she looked at you, and she came up with ways to leverage the human factors and analysis classification system in cybersecurity. And what it does for you is 4 levels in the we call it HFAX. There's 4 levels in HFAX, and each level takes a look at different things across the organization. And I just give you a real quick story of how this is really applied, and you'll get the madness behind it. So if you think about Equifax, when the Equifax CEO said what led to their breach was an information technologist not patching the system. He said that during a congressional testimony. I mean, as the senior leader of the company, that was a cheap way out, especially when somebody like me, I'm sitting there and watching that, and I'm saying, okay, let me apply HFAX to your organization. So in HFAX, we start at the lowest level. What was the incident that led to the breach? Was it the information technologist who didn't patch the system? Most of us will stop there and say, yes, that's it. But HFAX takes it 3 more levels. It takes you a level up now into a supervisory level where it says, what was the physical condition of the individual? What was the organizational climate, organizational culture going on? And what was the supervisory involvement? And so from that aspect, you say, the supervisor should have been overseeing and enforcing the governance of the organization to prevent the patching from not happening. And we all know that didn't occur. The next level up is another senior level of management who's responsible for executing the governance, right? And you can say, okay, a governance is an executive level function. And so they're responsible for not only the governance, but also some of the resourcing. And so who was providing the governance? It's like the internal auditing and the oversight of the patch management program. And then at the end of the day, the corporate executives are responsible for governance of the entire organization and risk management. And so if you had your governance and risk management program in place and in line, over the course of time, they would have saw that your patch management program is running behind. There's an issue with it, and they would have stepped in and they should have stepped in and provided what we call some type of remediation to get the patching done more quickly. And that would have broke what we call the Swiss cheese model, where things align, and if they align over time, it will lead to something catastrophic, because what it is, these failures are aligning, like the oversight, the non-patching, the lack of resourcing, and for the lack of somebody reviewing the auditing and aligning the governance to it. And so that's why the HFAX can be extremely invaluable in cybersecurity, because now you actually connecting the dots. HFAX is meant to be a preventative tool, not a tool for punishment. It's not used for any type of punitive situation. It's used to be preventative in nature. But as we all know in cybersecurity, when things happen and companies get breached or they have an attack, things turn punitive rather quickly. And that is a cultural problem inside of the cybersecurity domain, and things need to change by that. Because nowadays, it's not, if we attacked, it's when we attack. And then we're going to continue talking about some of the limitations here, and we're going to talk about biases. We all have biases. Regardless of who we all have biases. And we also have heuristics, a very abstract view of things based on our experiences. And then we have personal disposition. And what happens when all these things come together, you might not have all the information to make a decision. And then the last point here is the visceral influence, is that when you're faced with an attack, it's like a strong urge, a strong sensation that come in and monopolize your ability to think outside of that, because you're dealing with this attack and it's so strong, it's a strong urge. Only a few people have been trained properly to overcome this urge. And like the special forces or the military, they've been trained and they're so disciplined they can overcome this. The average persons have a hard time overcoming this. And so that's why when people attack you psychologically and that visceral influence come on right away, it's very difficult to deal with. And now we're going to talk about some human performance issues. A lot of these things, there was a lot of literature, not only in the academic side, but also in some of the business publications that talked about stress, distractions, fatigue, and burnout during the pandemic. Well, unfortunately, these things were already sustained and in full scope before the pandemic. The pandemic just shined another light on it and made it more noticeable to us that these issues are really debilitating to our employees. And our employees are distracted, they're stressed out, they might be fatigued, they might be burnt out. And when you have these type of human performance issues, it's extremely difficult for your employees to perform their jobs. Now, let's add another load-bearing factor in there. So let's now think about, what about if someone's dealing with a life-changing event, a divorce, a serious medical ailment, a loss of a loved one, someone's having some mental issues they never had before, somebody might be having an addiction they never had to deal with before, and when they come to work, do you really think they're at work? They might be there physically, but they're not there cognitively or mentally. And so let's think about how other domains deal with employees when they have these issues going on. So for instance, if a pilot is not feeling well, he can call in and say, hey, I'm not feeling well today. And the airlines will find another pilot to come in and fly that route or that particular flight for him. If a surgeon's not feeling well, he or she will cancel their schedule, especially if they're doing surgery, and they'll reschedule the surgeries. And nobody think anything about it. But in cybersecurity, when someone's saying, I'm not feeling well, we're not accustomed to saying, okay, just take the day off. That person will push on. And now we got this person who happened to be one of our lead architects involved in a major evolution such as a merger and acquisition. They're not there. They're there physically, they're not there mentally. We have to start thinking about, how do we account for human performance in cybersecurity? Most organizations can't even tell you how they measure human performance in cybersecurity. And here's the other thing. Human performance just not need to exist in cybersecurity. Human performance needs to exist across the organization, because everybody is a potential target when it comes to cybersecurity. The people in HR, the people in logistics, the people in your leadership and development, your senior executives, your supply chains, your small companies that you're doing business with, that you give access to your data and to your pay records. All of those entities are involved, and you should be gravely concerned about their human performance issues and implement a strategy to determine if these companies or these individuals if you can capture the human performance. We don't think about that, but it's a major, major issue. And so in my research, when I was looking at fatigue, I stopped here at this long list of fatigue. And why did I stop here? Is because the list goes on and on and on. But this is enough to really get your attention about the different types of fatigue that employees are facing at work. Your cybersecurity professionals and your information technology professionals are facing these things on a daily basis. These are people that you hire to protect your network and your infrastructure, to keep you safe. And they're dealing with all these different types of fatigue. When I have conversations with senior executives about how do they manage fatigue, most of them don't give me an answer that's, indicate to me that they're doing anything about it. So for instance, how do you manage fatigue? How do you prevent fatigue? How do you implement an anti-fatigue program? Most of them don't know. And a lot of people think that, fatigue comes from not getting enough sleep at night. Of course, in some cases, that's the case. But research also tells us that fatigue sometimes happens to be from the organizational climate and culture. And when people start to get fatigued and you don't manage the fatigue, it leads to burnout. And research also tells us when somebody reach a really poor state of burnout, where they are just chronic burnt out, we're talking 4 to 6 weeks to recover. And that means no work, not doing anything, just resting and recovering. And so we have to get to the left of that. And so we're not trying to mitigate this on the back end where it takes a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks. And so this leads us to human as an attack vector. Why the human? Because cybercriminals recognize that people are a major part of what we call the socio-technical system, which is meaning you got the technical aspects of the system and you got the human capital part of the system. And they realize that people are a major part of that. And they also realize that people have biases, they have experiences, and they have cognitive limitations. And so this is why human as an attack vector is beginning to gain more and more and more ground and becoming one of the primary attack vectors for cyber criminals and for hackers, is because they know that companies are not addressing the humans as an attack vector. And so you hear me use the term cognitive hacking, and it was about a year ago that I switched to using this term more regularly than using phishing and spear phishing. And those things are also forms of cognitive hacking. The reason why is because I think by using those terms, we don't really get to the point where we really understand the engineering behind a cognitive hack. A cognitive hack is a cyber criminal or a hacker trying to deceive us as end users to execute a violation of our security policies by doing something that they know is illegal. For instance, if I call you on the phone and I say, "Hi, I'm Calvin. I'm one of your supply chain managers with company XYZ, and I manage your payroll. Can you send me an updated personnel roster?" And I want to match the updated personnel rosters to the roster we have to make sure we get everybody's pay taken care of. And that's just one example, right? And so most people say, okay, that makes sense to me, but you have to look a little deeper now. Why am I calling you? And if we have a person, if we've done this before, we have a relationship, you should know who should be calling, or there's another way to send this, or shouldn't we just give this person access to this a different way? Why is this person calling me? That should be strange. But if I do this to you on a Friday afternoon, about 2:00, when you're ready to go for the weekend, and tell you that I need it in 15 minutes, see, I'm using time pressure to prompt you to do something that you would do. Time pressure also tricks a lot of us. And then if I call back and say, "Hey, I haven't gotten this. Can I escalate this to your manager? If I don't get it in within the next 10 minutes, I'm gonna have to talk to your manager." And so who wants to get in trouble? And so you see how these things can easily escalate, and how these cyber criminals and these hackers are so fluid at fooling us and hacking us to doing something that we normally wouldn't do. And what they're doing, they're hacking our psychological vulnerabilities. And the questions that remain in my research that I'm still trying to determine is, why do we become victim to cognitive hacking? And so there's two types of cognitive hackers. Now, I just used one that was very overt, where I just picked up the phone and I try to call someone. But there's another version that's called covert, where I might send you an email with a malicious attachment, or I might send a fraudulent transaction or a bill for the company to pay to deposit some money in my account. And so there's all kinds of things that we have to think about when it comes to cognitive hacking. the main thing we need to do is start classifying them as overt and covert, and training our employees that either one of them can be just as effective and damaging as the other. Just realize that they come in two different packages. And this slide here represents a very simple process of a phishing attack. The email goes out and it's targeting users. You click on the email, you download a malicious link. Now your system's in danger. And then what happens? It installs a remote access tool. There's something, when you click on that link, nothing happens. You click on it again, nothing happens. It's because it's applicationless, meaning that you don't see it, but in the background of your system, it's downloading that remote access terminal, meaning that it's giving the hacker access to your system without you knowing it. And that they can use that remote access terminal to access your system, to exfiltrate data. And some countries are very good at that. Some people who are just hackers are very good at it, but it works. And now they can get access into your internal network. They get to your data. And guess what? With the attacker, he doesn't stop there. He's going to do it again. Why? Because he was successful. Most people who are victimized in a cognitive attack are victimized more than once. That tells us that the training that we're taking, the security awareness, is not effective. And now we're also up against, cybercrime as a service. Again, we learn a lot from the dark web, and we know that cybercrime as a service is a huge phenomenon that not only are nation states partnering together to do, but now nation states are partnering together with malicious actors and terrorist groups and cyber terrorist groups across the globe to be able to pull off these type of malicious acts, and they're even providing 24/7 service. It's a formalized business. Unfortunately, it is, and it's a dark business. The payloads are cheap. When I mean the payloads, when I say payloads, I mean like the malicious payloads they use on us, like a malicious email or a malicious attachment or some software or some type of tool that you can easily access and execute on a user to damage their system, to either bring the system down, to slow it down, destroy it, or whatever your intent is. You can purchase that payload on the dark web for as low as 99 cents. And the other thing is they get to remain anonymous. And there are countless targets out there, countless opportunities for these people to target. But why are cognitive hacks so important and why are they so successful? Because employees are undertrained on cognitive hacking. Most of us get security awareness training about once a year. Some of us, if we're lucky, we get it twice a year. Now, one thing that I would recommend is that in order to reinforce employees and to strengthen them from becoming a victim to a cognitive hack, is to give them training, to give them updated security awareness that's reinforced. Kind of like pilots when they're flying, even though they're current in the aircraft, they have to go back to the training facility and they go through more induced training where they put emergency procedures on them to help them understand how to perform these procedures in the event of an emergency. For instance, when Sully landed the plane up in the Hudson, that was a miracle. Now every pilot is going through a very similar training in the simulator. They're simulating the exact environments and showing pilots what happened if you fly a different profile than what Sully would have flown that day. We need the same thing in cybersecurity. Why don't we have a simulator where I can say, Calvin, today for the first 20 minutes of your day, we're going to put you in a simulated cyber environment and we want you to make mistakes. I want you to make mistakes so I can show you the ramifications of making mistakes. For instance, make your password 123 and log in. And I'm going to show you how a hacker now can easily come in, guess your password, and guess what? Once a hacker gets your password, they're no longer breaking in, they're logging in. They're logging in as you. And it's very difficult for companies to determine if someone's logging in as you now. But it's happening. And so those are the things we need to do. We also need to understand and teach our employees about social media. A lot of the intelligence gathering on your employees are done through social media. They case your employees through social media, build a profile on them, and once they build that profile, they start to learn things about that employee or employees, and then they'll start developing their execution strategy for a cognitive attack. And some of the behaviors in cognitive attacks, why they're successful. Because when people are impulsive, like the example I provided earlier, where I say, if I don't get a call within, if I don't get this information within 5 minutes, I'm elevating it to your manager. Again, nobody likes their manager to be informed of them not actually doing a particular service or doing their job. So it creates a case where you have to be impulsive. And then it also going to create a case where you're probably losing self-control because you just want this matter to go away. And then compliance. Compliance goes out of the window because you're so focused on trying to get this particular task done or providing this supposedly small business third-party company that you're doing business with, an updated roster of your personnel. The other thing why these attacks are so successful is because people will emphasize authority, a voice of authority. For instance, your CEO asked that I send you this billing invoice and for you to pay it within the next 30 minutes. Again, they're using time pressure, they're using authority. Some of these stories or some of these cases and scams are very sophisticated, very, very real, but they're fake. And so these elements of human behavior contributes to cognitive hacks being successful. The other one we've seen use flattery. We've seen intimidation. I was at a conference last week and I was sitting on a panel and she told me about a case where they had someone who was dressed in a utility uniform for the utility company. The exact uniform, came in with an invoice for about, she told me about $10,000. And it was a healthcare company that provided a critical service to patients, and they demanded payment or they were going to turn off the water. What do you think happened? They paid it because they didn't want that water to be turned off, impacting the patients. And then we talk about trust. People sometimes they build relationships. And when you build that relationship with someone, and after they socially engineer you for weeks and weeks and weeks, you build a relationship, you trust them, and then they're going to ask you to do something that you shouldn't do. Most people are going to do it because they trust them. They don't know that they're part of a cognitive hack. Some of us are just gullible. At the end of the day, we got low self-esteem. We're just gullible. And that's why cognitive hacks are successful against us. But here's where the help comes in. I've been traveling around the country about 3 years now talking about human factors in cybersecurity. And one of the questions I like to ask is, how many organizations have hired a psychologist, a human factors practitioner, a cognitive analyst, a behavior analyst to help you understand human behavior in cybersecurity? And most times I don't get a hand. The only time I got a hand was there was a lady who worked for the United States Air Force, and she said, we hire human factors practitioners to work in our cybersecurity program. That's the only time. And I was really shocked, but I was happy to hear that though. And the reason these people are so important to your effort from a cybersecurity aspect is that they can help you improve your human-computer interaction, your design. Who you're designing for? Are we designing with strong security and strong usability without a trade-off on either? That should be our goal. That should be our goal. I remember about 2 years ago, I had a wrist injury, and I had to wear a brace, and I wasn't able to work my iPhone. And I couldn't do the snapshot to take the screenshots. And I called Apple, and I said, I can't take a snapshot due to my brace. They told me, try some of our assistive technologies. Let us help you with that. Within a couple of minutes, I had a point on my phone where I could hit one button and it captured my screen. That's why you have human factors, practitioners integrated into your operations, so you can have that kind of result when people needed it. That's what you call high usability and high security. We really want to look at integrating psychology-based professionals to help us enhance our human-centered cybersecurity. We want to keep people at the core of our activities, and we want to build around people so that we build into the natural abilities and limitations of people. Right now, it's technology, and we build around it. We put people around it, we put policies around it, and that is not a strong foundation, because now people are constantly trying to catch up to the technologies, and they've also been manipulated by the policies and controls you have in place. And also, we need to identify our critical operation tasks and functions. For example, if I was to talk to a pilot and I say, can you tell me the two critical phases of flight? He will say during takeoff and during landing. But if I ask you, what are your critical phases or operations as a cybersecurity professional or as an information technologist, you give me some things, but you wouldn't give me all things that are critical. And see, when we say critical, we need to identify what's the cognitive demand associated with those tasks. Because if you got employees working with high cognitively demanding tasks and functions, you got to understand they may be going to do one or two things a day versus somebody who's working on a low cognitive task and functions. They might be able to do 10 to 15 things a day. You got to understand the trade-off, because at the end of the day, it's human performance. You got to account for that too. How many of us have been cognitively hacked by our friends? You ever thought about that? I mean, all of our friends, I got a good friend of mine, I'm loving him to death. He's always recommending something to me. And I had to tell him one day, you know, you recommend so much stuff to me, I believe nothing you send to me anymore. Because I don't know, some of us get socially influenced in a bad way by our friends. And that is how we get cognitively hacked. Your friend co-signs something or give a pass to something, and because your friend gives it a pass, you give it a pass. We have to ask questions. We have to ask more, thought-provoking questions around, why is this person trying to push this on me? What is it? You never know. So be careful of social proofing and social influence. And we talked about this earlier. Again, the visceral influence is real. And most people that talk about when they've been hacked, a lot of times they can't even talk about what they did. They just remember that whatever the event was to getting them to do something was so strong that they were so immersed in this event that that training just went out of the window. They didn't even think. They just reacted. And so what makes our employees vulnerable to cognitive hacks? The first one is there's an underappreciation of human factors, the scientific definition of human factors in cybersecurity. There's a lack of human factors initiatives in cybersecurity. Our cybersecurity awareness is ineffective. It needs to be reinforced. It needs to be updated. When the latest techniques and procedures that come out from being used by cybercriminals and malicious actors, companies need to be training, updating their security awareness, and teaching people how to mitigate and prevent these things from happening. Poor system design and integration, absolutely. Lack of mitigation around the human element. We try to control the human element with policies and security controls. That's not enough. Complexity debt. We don't do a well enough job in reducing complexity debt. And malicious actors understand your human limitations of your employees better than you do. So let's talk very quickly through some initiatives, how to counter this, some mitigation strategies. First of all, we have to get rid of the under-education on human factors. We have to acknowledge that there's a gap, and we have to demand and work towards closing that gap. No longer when a human factors practitioner shows at the door, that corporate executive should be closing that door saying, I need more cybersecurity engineers. And here's why. Cybersecurity engineers are great. They're very good at what they do. But what they don't do human factors engineering. And so the problem you run into is that most organizations try to fix their human factors issue with their organic talent. Like I told you earlier, most don't have a human factors practitioner on their staff, and most don't have a human factors practitioner integrated in their cybersecurity operations. You can't fix this with your organic talent. It's the same as having a bus mechanic working on a jet engine. It doesn't work. But yet you're taking that risk. And some of these companies are investing over $1 billion a year in their cybersecurity strategies and efforts. I recommend organizations develop a human factors program. And the researchers, our job is to seek to understand the physical, the behavior, the cognitive, and the social characteristics of cybersecurity for our cybersecurity and technology professionals. And that's what we do. Our job is to remove the high friction points of human behavior and performance. How do we make it better? How do we smooth those things out? How do we come up with better alignment, better design to make sure that the human element is integrated in a way that everything is shaped around the human capability? You need a human factors platform that's executive led. Give it some teeth. Intentionally targeting cybersecurity and make human factors a mainstream topic. Right now, I'm a big football fan. And so if I was a head coach and you ask me where's human factors on the team, I would tell you they're on the third team. They're not on the first team, not on the second team. There's too many other competing requirements. I got them on the third team. We need to change that because human factors is a major vector into your organization so your organization can be attacked. You need to set some human factors goals, whatever they may be. Set these goals. For every organization, it's going to be a little different, but set them and work towards them. And remember why you're setting these goals and make these goals a part of your cybersecurity strategy. Integrate human factors across the organization as much as you can, because at the end of the day, you're really talking about mitigating human risk. And this is a group of individuals you want to partner with. There's a lot of work going on now where we're really beginning to integrate user experience researchers and the designers into organizations. Most of these teams are looking externally. And I don't have a problem with most of these teams looking externally. The problem is, if these people are about improving customer experiences, what about improving employee experiences by reciprocating what they do internally to take a look at your cybersecurity programs? They bring some great tools with them to help you enhance your employee experiences from a cybersecurity perspective. Some other initiatives you can do is recognize the gap, build that platform, conduct a human factors risk assessment. Most companies conduct a risk assessment once or twice a year, but they don't include a human factors risk assessment. Partner with the human factors specialist. Again, internally focused UX design practices and conduct surveys to determine stress, fatigue, burnout level so you can put mitigating factors to prevent you from working from the right, but you want to work from the left. And again, the business value in human factors are just that it makes sense. Human factors make the company more profitable because it's about reducing human-enabled risk and errors. And with that, I'll open it to questions.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. We do have quite a few questions that came in. And I know we only have about 5 minutes left. I don't want to run too long here. So Dr. Nobles, if you wouldn't mind sharing your email address in the chat if people have more questions than we can get to. But the first question we have is, are there any tutorial books for this topic for after class learning that you would recommend?
That is a major gap that we have, is that the last book that was written on human factors and information security was written in 2009. I've been getting a lot of pressure to write a book. And so I'm partnering with some other human factors and psychologists to actually write a book on human factors and cybersecurity. I just got a request in today from the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer at the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, asking me the same question.
That's great. Well, we will be sure to keep an eye out for your book in the future as soon as it's available. And then we have a question from Mark. Based on what you're saying, then to prevent cognitive hacks, remove the human. To what degree are humans the attraction versus a system code?
So here's the problem with it, is that we're not saying remove the human. We're saying train the human, educate them, increase their awareness. This has to be reinforced over and over again, every quarter. Every time there's a change in techniques used by hackers or used by cybercriminals, you got to inform your employees of the change and the techniques that they're going to be using. Because if you don't, that gap will become a vector for your employees to get attacked. And so it requires reinforced security awareness and constant, updating on the different techniques, tactics, and procedures that cybercriminals and hackers are using.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Mark. One of the questions that was submitted is, more generally, how does the cybersecurity industry stay ahead of so many different threats?
Stay ahead of what now?
How does the cybersecurity industry stay ahead of so many different threats?
Just like I just said, it requires constant and reinforced attention. The problem is we give people security awareness training and we walk away from it. We can't do that anymore. We have to, this training has to be reinforced. We have to take some pages from other areas that's done amazingly well, like in healthcare, like in aviation, like in special operations. Special operators go through training every day. They're doing things to reinforce certain habits. We need to do the same thing in cybersecurity. You can no longer just say you had your training, so you've been warned. That's not good enough anymore. And cybercriminals know that most employees are only getting training maybe once and twice a year if they're lucky. They know that and they're capitalizing on that. So your training needs to be continuous, and it needs to be, from a point to where everybody's not getting the same training. If you work in HR, you work in logistics, or you work in supply chain, your training needs to be different than from the information technologist and the cybersecurity professional. You're seeing things from a different angle. And so that's why, taking your security awareness training out of a mayonnaise jar and slapping it on the sandwich and everybody get the same taste, it doesn't work. You have to have individualized training so people can understand what they're up against.
Thank you. We had a very similar question. I think you just addressed it. That was about, are there any corporate policies that could help support cybersecurity professionals? And I think our last question that's been submitted is, are there any particular websites or apps that you know of that have been more susceptible to, that have been more susceptible to human error mistakes and led to being hacked?
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them. Here's at the end of the day, the thinking of a cyber criminal is, I need access. What vector can I use to get access? Now, if you look at what companies have done, companies have bombarded themselves very well from a technology aspect. And so they no longer want to tackle you head on through your technology. Now, if they can, they will tackle you on through your technology if they find a gap or if they find a weakness or a vulnerability. However, it's much easier for them to log in. Hackers no longer like breaking in, they like logging in. So how do I log in? I target someone and get their login credentials, and I become them. It's much easier for me to traverse your network that way than for me breaking in from a technology side, having to work a little harder, because if I'm too noisy, I get noticed by the system. If I don't, then I have an opportunity to be successful.
Well, thank you so much. We have one last question. Are there any related courses that are provided by Illinois Tech that alumni could enroll in related to this topic?
So I just came on board in August, and so I just developed the human factors in cybersecurity course. I'm going to be teaching that course for the first time and starting in January. And so it is a full immersion of the human element in cybersecurity, how to address some of the things I talked about tonight, but it goes a lot more in depth in some of the areas. And so I don't know how we go about getting this course out to the alumni, but if you want to come back and take this course, please just let us know. We'd be glad to have you in here.
Well, thank you again. This has been absolutely wonderful. Just a reminder to everyone that this presentation was recorded, so it should be available on our website in the next couple of weeks. We do not have an Alumni University presentation in December, so please check back on our website. We should have the 2022 sessions up in the next couple of weeks. So thank you again, Dr. Nobles.
You're very welcome. Thank you all for listening tonight. Thank you.